Hi, everyone. I'm so glad that we have such a vibrant audience tonight. I've heard some great things backstage. So I want to get to know this audience myself, I think it's really important for a presenter and her audience to know each other. So let's start with a few icebreaker questions. I'll ask you some stuff, and you raise your hand when you'd like to answer. All right? So let's start with something simple, gentle. Let's ease into it. How many people have broken a law today? Okay, we have a few daring individuals. So let's think about this in terms of the theme of this event. How many of you do you think will break the law in the next 10 years? Raise your hand if you think you will. Okay, at least we have an honest crowd. Let's put a number to this feeling. How many times do you think you will break the law in the next 10 years? Okay, I'll say a few numbers and you raise your hand when it's applicable. You'll break 0 laws in the next 10 years. Great, I love that. Okay, 10 laws, 100, 1,000, 10,000, more, a huge number. Okay, I see you, great. All right, well, according to Harvey Silvergate, the average person will break 3 laws every single day, which amounts to around 11,000 laws per person over the next 10 years. And that's an astounding figure. I mean, most people didn't even think they broke a law today. So what does that say about us? I mean, is it that we're horrible people? Because then I'm really glad that I'm on stage, a little bit safe, and you guys can just sort yourselves out. But yeah, he thinks it's because that people just aren't aware that these laws apply in this particular circumstance, or that they're unaware of why this law is relevant. So that doesn't say anything bad about us. However, there's somebody else who has to follow the law. And if this person follows the law, it actually has a lot of impact on our lives. Can you think about who this person is? Feel free to shout it out. Hint, hint, this person follows international law. Anyone? Yep, countries. Countries have to follow law. They follow international law. So how do countries compare to the average citizen? Do you think they follow more laws, an equal amount, or less? Raise your hand. Do you think they break more laws than the average citizen? Okay, well, this audience has no faith in humanity. That's what we've established tonight. How many people think that they break an equal amount? Okay, how many people think that countries are very law-abiding, they do what they're supposed to do, they're way better off than us? Okay, we get a few more hand raised. Actually, this minority crowd is the right one. According to Louis Henkin, almost all nations observe almost all principles of international law and almost all of their political obligations almost all of the time. So he actually suggests a really great future. He's saying that we're living in the prime of when international law is abided by and there's an amazing culture. But when somebody says almost that much, I think it raises a few flags, because that implies that there are instances when laws are broken. And as we know, when countries break laws, it's not just one person that's involved. It's entire nations, it's huge populations. So the reality is that countries break laws, and they do so not because, like us, they don't know laws apply. I mean, countries have lots of advisors at their disposals. Clearly, they're doing so intentionally. Countries break laws when it's prudent, and they follow them. They break them whenever it's convenient, which is something that will weigh down on our future, because in the next 10 years, we're going to be forced to cooperate as a species. We're going to have to deal with issues like climate change, technological advancement, humanitarianism, and these are not solved in isolation. These are solved together as an international community. And that can't happen if we're violating trust. That can't happen if we're breaking international law whenever one feels it's more convenient for the other and forcing everybody else into a horrible future. So what do we do? How do we choose to follow or not follow international law? Because these kind of things, they happen far away from us. We're really far from these decisions when they're made. So what do we do? I mean, actually, we're not that far from these decisions. Raise your hand if you've read a newspaper headline in just as far as you can remember that reads something like, blank country is in violation of blank convention, or blank country is in violation of blank treaty, blank country violates blank ICJ ruling. Have you seen stuff like this before? Yeah, we've all seen it. And does anybody in this room think about why countries do those things? Do we think about the consequences this has for a future? Because our opinion matters. Our opinion shapes what our world leaders think about. It shapes how we as a culture think about international law. Because the reality is that we're one of the few generations that have ever had to think about international law. International law is very new, but it's very relevant to our future. So today, let's think about international law. Let's solve this problem. Let's walk out all knowing how to read headlines and how to think about what our respective countries do. So let's start with something chill. Let's start with something easy, something we're all familiar with, gratitude. I want you to think about it. Who are you grateful for? Start listing it. Think your mom, your dad, your wonderful teachers. You know, lots of people. We're grateful for lots of people. So when you're making this list, do you include your country in that list? Do you include your fellow countrymen, your government? Do they make it onto your list? Raise your hand if yes. Okay, yes, that's the response I was looking for. Most of us don't think about it, but it's actually not, it might be, we should be thinking about this kind of stuff, because actually Socrates, we all know, Greek philosopher, when he was sentenced to death by a jury, he chose to follow that ruling. He chose to die because he said, one of the reasons at least that he said was, he's grateful to his countrymen. He owes it to them to do this. But we don't have those feelings. Should we? Should we have these feelings? According to gratitude theory, if you have benefited from someone, then you should be grateful to them. And because you are grateful, you have an obligation to them. And if you have an obligation to someone, you should act in their interest. You should not do anything that hurts them. So if we apply this to international law, if you as a person or if you as a country have benefited from international law, then you have an obligation to service the international community. You have an obligation to follow international law and keep to your word and help foster a productive environment. But is that the whole picture? I mean, is everybody in the crowd convinced? Everyone's going to go home and be like, yes, I should be grateful. I'm going to follow every law there is on the planet. No? Okay, well, I see that the audience is not convinced. And for good reason, because gratitude usually stems from sacrifice. When someone sacrificed something for us, that is when we feel grateful, because we know that something has been given up for us to accomplish these things. But the international community doesn't necessarily make sacrifices for one specific country. We don't necessarily, an entire nation cannot feel grateful. So this theory actually fails to give us a good role model for the next 10 years. But what it does do effectively is give us an emotional response. It connects us emotionally to international law. It makes it seem less distant, more personal to us. But where this theory leaves off, others pick up. We have another one. This theory feels that, why do you think laws are created? What is the purpose of laws? Is it A, to help humanity? Is it B? Fill in the options, guys. You're creative. Fill in these options. It's actually A. It's A. Most people think that countries create laws to benefit people, right? That's when we think about the UN. The UN is actually meeting right now. We think that, wow, we're making progress as humanity. We're accomplishing things. And that's our hope. And so some scholars argue that we should follow international law because this is an amazing goal. We should help follow laws that help accomplish these goals. And while this is the ideal version, it's not the reality. The reality is that international law is still largely dictated by more powerful, wealthy countries. And so international law and treaties favor certain states and not others. Other states have to compromise some of their agency in order to follow international law. So this doesn't actually explain why we should follow international law if it's not helping us. But that's okay. What this theory does tell us is that we have to look to a future. We have to think about the models of why we are following international law. It's not as simple as what the law is accomplishing today, it's about what the law is telling us and what moral reactions we have to law in the future. But we have one final theory that helps explain where this theory also leaves off. This theory doesn't have a name. I like to call it the cooperative theory to make myself feel better. But yeah, what this theory states is that international law shouldn't be followed for the merit of, oh, I'm following this law because this is what it's accomplishing and this is the reasons as to what it's resulting in. No, it argues that the whole point of international law, the whole point of following international law, is that it creates a culture of cooperation. It creates a culture in which countries enter more multilateral instead of bilateral treaties. It creates a culture in which countries are accountable for the laws they make because they will be required to upkeep them. It creates a culture in which accountability increases and thereby creates a society in which our futures are better looked after. So ultimately, none of these theories actually help paint the whole picture. And this is true because it's called the problem of political obligation. Today, the academic community doesn't have a single answer for you and I as to why we should follow the law. But still, you and I do it. We follow laws because we think there's some merit to it, right? And this is the discussion we have to have with international law. The answer isn't out there for us. It's an answer that we have to develop individually because that's just how it is. We aren't necessarily taught in school that you should follow law because of these and these theories. We do it because it's an organic feeling that develops. It's a culture we've decided on as society because we've had laws for all these years. And that is the conversation we have to have today if we're going to have a culture of international cooperation in the future. So when everyone goes home and everyone sees a new headline that says, blank person has violated international law, think about not, oh, what is this amounting to right now? Think about why they should have followed or not followed international law in the next 10 years and what that's going to say for you and I. Thank you.